Hello, Emory Baptist. Welcome to Sunday School for Sunday, November 29th, and we will be looking at Isaiah chapter 65, verses 17 through 25. And the title of this session is called God Restores. I hope that you had a good Thanksgiving. My family, on Thanksgiving Day, we went to the Mineola Nature Preserve just to do some walking and hiking, and a couple of my kids took their bicycles to ride bicycles, and so we actually walked this very long trail out to this kind of really picturesque place. But on the way back, rather than walking the long trail back, I decided that we should take the shorter trail back to the other side. It's kind of a big loop, and so I thought we should take the shorter trail. And as we got most of the way down that shorter trail, the ground turned from rather solid to rather muddy. And it was not just any kind of mud, it was that black clay, that really sticky black clay that was there. And as two of my kids were there with their bicycles, the tires became caked with the mud, so much so that my youngest son could no longer push his bicycle. He couldn't ride it at all, but he could no longer push it because the mud had caked up around the wheels and the wheels no longer spun. And so I ended up carrying his bicycle, and I just found myself pushing forward, just trying to get to the road ahead of us as fast as I could, because that was my mentality, is I'm kind of in a place of misery, but there is a place up there that I need to get to. And if I can just make it through this, then I can make it up there. And thankfully, my family, we did make it all the way through and got to that road and cleared a bunch of the mud off, and was able to cleared the mud off of our shoes as well, and was able to make it back to where we had started. And I kind of bring that story up because that's the picture that we're looking at here in Isaiah, that the hope ahead of us, kind of like that road, was the hope ahead of my family as we were going through that rather miserable, muddy trail. The hope ahead of us as Christians is the central truth of today's lesson, and that is that the one true God promises to restore his creation for his people through faith in his Son. Isaiah 65 verses 17 through 20 talks about a place of joy. It says, "For I will create a new heavens and a new earth. The past events will not be remembered or come to mind. Then be glad and rejoice forever that I am in what I am creating. For I will create Jerusalem to be a joy and its people to be a delight. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. The sound of weeping and crying will no longer be heard in her. In her, a nursing infant will no longer live only a few days, or an old man not live out his days. Indeed, the one who dies at 100 years old will be mourned as a young man, and the one who misses 100 years will be considered cursed." Isaiah chapter 63 and 64 has this picture of judgment on the nations, that God is calling out judgment on the nations, dealing with sin and dealing with Israel's oppressors. And so here in chapter 65, we see God reestablishing a relationship with his people, and in fact, putting his presence there, bringing them into his presence. And so it's kind of like this reset to the garden. There's this reestablishing of a nation of Israel in the promised land as it should have been, with God, with his people. And it talks about it being a joy and a delight, that there's this sharp contrast to death, destruction, and sin, and the failure that Israel was supposed to be this light to the Gentiles, the failure that they had not done that. That's the reality that Isaiah was dealing with, and he was doing this reset back away from what the present reality was and going towards what it should be, because right now we're experiencing this world that's in the midst of a loss. I don't know how you're feeling right now. Saw a thing on Facebook that said, we used to eat cake that someone had just blown on. Good times, right? I remember many years ago, it feels like many years ago, that someone would blow out the candles on a cake, and then we would cut that cake up and serve it to people. Well, these days we don't want people even breathing on us, much less the food we're about to eat, right? It's kind of this weird reality that we're in because we're experiencing, hey, there is this problem with the world in which we live. Well, that's not the way it was in the beginning. In fact, Genesis 1 and 2 talk about good. It says that when God created something, it says it was good, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. And whenever God had created all things, it says that it was very good. That God's created order was this beautiful paradise with man in the Garden of Eden with God as his watcher, as the God over him. And then in chapter 3, we see the fall. And in this fall, we see the disruption of the created order. But even in chapter 3, we have this little note of hope that comes through in Genesis 3:15 that talks about the seed of woman. I'm a big Star Wars nerd, and so I think about Luke Skywalker, this little desert farmer boy who was really the hope of the galaxy. Just nobody knew it yet. And so as you watch that movie progress, you see this person who was a nobody really come out of nowhere and become the hero of the story. Well, you see that throughout the Bible. You see this little notes of hope, this problem that we have, this giant problem that we have that one day will be fixed. And as we see that in little notes all the way through the Old Testament, we see this really big one here in chapter 65. And it talks about the old things being not remembered. That is, the stain of sin will be removed from the people, that you and I kind of exist in this world, that just kind of sin and brokenness is the way things are. My family's been quarantined for about 2.5 weeks now, and as a part of that, it was kind of as quarantine was ending for us, I had the thought, hey, we could go out to eat at a restaurant. And it was kind of this new thought for me. Oh man, I haven't been to a restaurant, and I don't know how, it felt like forever. I don't know how long it's been since I've eaten in a restaurant, you know. And that was kind of the way it is, that when you just kind of get used to something and these very foreign ideas and even stuff that happened really not that long ago, if it's not been part of your present reality, it sort of fades into the background. Well, you and I experience brokenness in this world, and we don't know what the perfection of the garden looks like because you and I, of course, weren't there, but the creation, the earth, God created this order differently than the way that we're experiencing it. And so there's this coming recreation, and part of it happened at Jesus' first advent, at the first time that he came. This partial new creation of creating new people, creating new followers. Not that we have this new bodies and new resurrected lives yet, but we have a renewed spirit, that the Spirit of God abides in us. But there will be a second coming, a second advent of Jesus, who will bring complete renewal for all things. And in verse 18 talks about that we should rejoice in the renewal that is coming, looking forward, right? Looking forward to that day. My family is in the midst, I told you last week, in the midst of Christmas decorating and Christmas celebrating. We've got our plans drawn up and buying presents and wrapping things. We actually have a tree up and presents wrapped underneath the tree. I don't know if we're ahead of the schedule or not, but when you have a couple weeks off and online shopping, it sure is easy to get some stuff done. Well, we're looking forward to this celebration of Christmas. Well, that's the picture here, that God says Jerusalem will be a joy and its people will be a delight. That Israel had failed in their job to honor God before the nations. And this is the correction to that failure, that the people are redeemed and restored, and that Israel will be a light for the nations to bring the nations to God's glory. Well, God delights here in his people. And a lot of times we think of God as the rightful judge, right? The executor of judgment. And that's true. That's right. That's who God is. God is a just God who brings judgment. Otherwise, he would not be worthy of worship. If he was anything other than righteous and just, then he would not be God. Well, A lot of times in thinking of him that way, we tend to forget about his compassionate side. That really, to be honest with you, the side that Jesus revealed, that the reality of God as the Father of us, that God's fatherhood was revealed in Jesus. And sometimes we even think of fathers maybe even as disciplinarians. Some of you may remember the song "A Boy Named Sue" by Johnny Cash, about a man that named his son Sue, and then that boy grew up just angry and mad at the world until he went to find his father, and he found out the reason his father named him Sue was to make him tough, was to make him hard. It really kind of made his life hard. Because the father wanted him to be the kind of hard person that he needed to be. Well, that's not a reality. In fact, fathers delight in their children. For the most part, they want what's best for them. In fact, Luke chapter 11, verse 11 says, "What father among you," Jesus asked, "what father among you, if his son asks for a fish, will give him a snake instead of a fish?" No father that I know has ever, his son has been hungry for lunch and the father springs a trap on him. I've never seen that, But we see the goodness of a father who is a disciplinarian, who does bring justice, but at the same time delights in his children. Well, the goodness of God towards his people is demonstrated in the removal of suffering. And the illustration that Isaiah uses talks about losing an infant, this loss of an infant, this person, this little person. The most bitter picture of suffering would be the loss of life young. Well, this life, the life in the new creation is this where life is the norm rather than death. There's these comparative pictures that talk about 100-year-olds. Today, you and I think of 100-year-olds, people who live to be 100, and we think, oh my goodness, what a long life. And even if someone dies at 96, 97, 98, my grandfather passed away, I think at 96 or 7 years old. And the things that we said is, man, he had a good life. We missed him. We're sorry that he's gone, but he had a good life. He had a good long life, and we should celebrate that. Well, the picture here is this comparison that Isaiah says, in that day, the people that we would consider the ones who had a good long life, those will be the ones who are considered taken too young. He says cursed, right? If someone's cursed, they're taken too young and they died too early. Well, he's saying these people that we consider now long-lived people, they will be considered in that day, oh my gosh, he only lived to be 100? He only lived to be 110, 120? What happened to him? What was wrong? So there's this comparative picture. It reminds me of whenever my kid says to me, back when I was a kid, whatever my son says to me when I was little, and I kind of want to go, you're still little, right? You've only been around for less than 2 decades. So, don't get all nostalgic on me very much, right? The picture here is that life becomes the norm, that God will give life to his people and delight in them. And it talks about here in chapter 65, verses 21 through 23, this place of prosperity. It says in verse 21, people will build houses and live in them, and they will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They will not build and others live in them. They will not plant and others eat. For my people's lives will be like the lifetime of a tree. My chosen ones will fully enjoy the work of their hands. So they will not labor without success or bear children destined for disaster, for they will be people blessed by the Lord along with their descendants. I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but certainly you've probably seen it on TV. This picture of a bully who gets on the school bus, and as he's walking down, he takes the little kid's lunch, and he takes the little kid's lunch back to his seat, opens it up, and begins to eat that kid's lunch. And you kind of have this bad feeling, this poor kid, that this big person, this big bully has come and taken his lunch. Well, that's really kind of the reality of the Israelites in a lot of ways. That first of all, to be honest with you, when God established them in the nation of Israel, the Promised Land, that God kicked out the Canaanites. That the Canaanites had built cities, and Israel moved in and took those cities. In fact, Jerusalem was originally the city of the Jebusites, that it was this fortified city that took forever to actually oust all the Jebusites that lived there and took it over and became the fortress of Jerusalem. Well, this picture of someone building a house and then being kicked out and someone else coming in and taking it, well, that was also repeated later as Israel battled and lost cities to the Philistines and even the Assyrian and the Babylonian empires that came and conquered them. And so you see this as a picture of judgment, that the thing that you work for is taken away. Well, here Isaiah says that you will, instead of working really hard for something and then losing it, you will enjoy the fruit of your work. That there will not be pointless work, there will not be purposelessness, but there will be purposeful in your work. And so there won't be any more judgment, there won't be any more loss. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 18 through 20 says, I came to hate all my hard work here on earth, for I must leave to others everything I have earned. And who can tell whether my successors will be wise or foolish? Yet they will control everything I have gained by my skill and hard work under the sun. How meaningless. So I gave up in despair, questioning the value of all my hard work in this world. Some of us may feel that way, that all the things that we work for, we leave to someone else, or we lose to someone else, or it goes somewhere and it gets wasted or squandered in some way that we didn't expect. I've got a friend on Facebook who lives in New Mexico, and he shared an article about the present governor of New Mexico, who started in January of 2019. And when she started, there was a $1.1 billion budget surplus when she took over in January of 2019. And as of right now, or as of just a few weeks or maybe months ago, the state of New Mexico now faces a $991 million budget shortfall. And so imagine being the governor who built up a $1.1 billion budget surplus, who now in just a couple of years sees all of that effort gone, all of that work gone. Well, that's the picture of the way things are presently. But in this new creation, lives will be compared, rather than being short and rather than being pointless, they'll be compared to the lives of a tree. That there's this longevity, that they continue to go on, and they continue to see fruit. Year after year, trees bear fruit. And you see them bearing fruit and being productive. Well, that's the picture of life in the new creation. That's the coming new normal. I don't know if you're tired of hearing that phrase. I'm tired of hearing that phrase, the new normal, especially about the situation that we're in. I don't want this to be normal. This is kind of a painful normal. Well, the new normal that's coming in the recreation will be that labor is successful, and that life will be long, and that life without guarantees will become guaranteed blessings in life. And so we see here in chapter 65, verses 24 through 25, this place of peace. And it says in 24, even before I call, I will answer. Even before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb will feed together, and the lion will eat straw like cattle. But the serpent's food will be dust. They will not do what is evil or destroy on my entire holy mountain, says the Lord. When it talks about before they call, I will answer, I thought of the old TV show, The Addams Family, where they would ring the bell, and instantly there was this giant guy there, and his name was Lurch. And as soon as they rang the bell, he said, "You rang." I don't know if you've seen that TV show, but that came to mind, this ever-present. As soon as you ask, as soon as you call, it seems like the person is already there. Well, I'm not trying to compare God to Lurch, but I'm just trying to point to this ever-presentness of God, that even before we have a need, even before we need, even before we look for God, God is already there. In fact, God has already demonstrated his goodness towards us. You guys remember Romans 5:8, that God demonstrates his own love towards us in this, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so we have this picture of God always being present, and especially in this new creation, being present with God, Before he even calls, before we even speak, he already hears and he already knows. And you see this pictured, this peace pictured in an odd animal behavior. Right now, of course, we know what predators are, that predators naturally catch and eat prey. My family was at the zoo one time, and we were looking at the saltwater crocodile exhibit. And as we were watching the saltwater crocodile up against the glass, we were kind of inside, and there was this glass that had like half the glass below the water and half the glass above. Well, we were inside looking at the saltwater crocodile, and that crocodile began to move away from the glass, and we were wondering what it was doing. And all of a sudden, it jumped out of the water and grabbed a free-flying grackle that had landed in its pen and thought that was a good place. Well, this crocodile, saltwater crocodile, leaped up and grabbed this bird and chewed and ate the bird in front of everybody. And there were these feathers all over the water and all over the land. And my kids thought it was cool. I'm sure other kids were kind of thrown back by that. But we know that predators eat prey. Well, here there's this new picture of peace. Rather than saltwater crocodiles eating grackles, we see the wolf and the lamb, natural predator and prey, feeding at the same trough. We see lions eating bales of hay, right, next to the cows, that they line up together, and rather than seeing a lion stalking a prey, we see the lion just come up and start grazing next to the animal that would normally be prey. Well, that's kind of a picture of the reverse of the curse that happened, that there will be no longer death. There's no longer this death that happens as part of the world in which we live. But there's something unique about it. Even though there is this reversal of the brokenness of the world, there is something that persists, and that is that the serpent continues to eat dust. That the serpent eats dust, that was part of the punishment. That was part of the consequence for the serpent before the tempter, Satan, in the garden, was that he would be unsuccessful and he would eat dust. I think of Wile E. Coyote that was always trying to catch the Roadrunner, and the Wile E. Coyote never caught the Roadrunner. In fact, he would just kind of chase after the Roadrunner into a cloud of dust, right? And after the dust cleared, there was old Wile E. Coyote by himself with nothing to eat once again. Well, this picture here is a reference to the curse on the serpent, that the tempter in Genesis will not be successful. And so his efforts to destroy humanity and God's plan turns out to be dust, because God redeems and God restores and God recreates a people for himself. And the people will not do what is evil or destroy in God's created order, in God's creation. And so you see that everything is fixed and returned, but Satan is still unsuccessful. Satan's reward is still nothing, still dust. Well, to summarize this lesson today, let's point out here what we're trying to see and trying to hope. First of all, believers can live in hope, knowing that God will one day create a new heaven and a new earth. And believers can live with confidence, knowing that they will experience God's blessing for eternity. And believers can live with expectancy, knowing that God's peace will reign in eternity. And so let me ask us a few contemplation questions that you can think about and maybe contact someone and discuss. So number one, here we go. What situations in life might rob you of hope, and how can this passage about restoration and creation remind you of hope? Number two, what can you do today to live in anticipation of the new coming creation? And number three, how should the removal of sin from the created order impact how you study your Bible and live today? Let me pray for us, and then we can move on with the rest of our day. Jesus, I love you. Thank you for your grace. And Lord, I pray that you would, God bless us and help us, God, as we move from this place. Father, help us to put our hope in you. And God, in the moments and times that we might become discouraged, help us to remember the hope that's before us. And God, I pray that you would make us a people who work actively to bring about your glory, to bring about heaven here on earth, that here on earth your kingdom would come and your will be done here as well as it will be in heaven. God, help us to be a people who delight in you and trust in you to bring all things about. And help us to share the gospel with people around us who don't know that and who need to. I love you, Jesus. In your name I pray.